Wife used intimacy as a control tool, so I accepted a job 3,000 miles away. Intimacy is off the table until you start obeying me. Those were the exact words my wife Jessica said while blocking the bedroom doorway, her arms crossed and eyes cold as ice. What she didn't know was that I'd already been offered a dream job in Seattle, 3,000 miles away, and her ultimatum just made my decision incredibly easy. But let me start from the beginning, because this story gets so much worse before it gets better. If you're into honest stories about relationships, trust, and betrayal, hit that follow button. You won't want to miss the next one. For 6 years, I thought Jessica and I had built something beautiful together. We met in college, dated for 3 years, got married in what felt like a fairy tale wedding, and settled into what I believed was domestic bliss. I was wrong about everything. The mask didn't slip gradually. It fell off completely on a Tuesday night that changed my life forever. I'd made plans to grab dinner with my college roommates, guys I hadn't seen in months. Normal friend hangout, nothing unusual. I mentioned it to Jessica that morning over coffee. "Sounds fun," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Have a good time." By evening, her tune had completely changed. "You can't go," she announced as I was getting ready to leave. I laughed, thinking she was joking. "What do you mean I can't go?" "I mean you're not going anywhere tonight. We need to talk about your priorities." I stared at her, confused. "Jess, what's this about? You said it was fine this morning." That was before I realized how often you choose your friends over me. Choose them over you? "I spend maybe one evening a month with my friends." Her expression hardened. "One evening too many." That's when she dropped the bomb that would detonate our entire marriage. "From now on, you check with me before making any social plans. And until you start respecting me enough to do that, intimacy is off the table." I stood there, car keys in hand, processing what I just heard. My wife, the woman I'd promised to love and honor, was holding our physical relationship hostage to control my social life. "You're seriously withholding sex to make me obey you?" I asked, barely believing the words coming out of my mouth. "I prefer to think of it as setting boundaries," she replied with a shrug that made my blood run cold. "When you start consulting me before making plans that affect our relationship, we can resume normal marital relations." The casual way she delivered this ultimatum was what really broke something inside me. This wasn't a moment of anger or hurt feelings. This was calculated manipulation, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd used this tactic before. That night I slept on the couch, not because she'd banished me there, but because I couldn't stand to be next to someone who viewed love as a transaction. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, memories flooded back with painful clarity. The passive-aggressive comments when I spent time with my family. The subtle guilt trips when I pursued hobbies she didn't share. The way she'd gradually isolated me from friends she deemed bad influences, meaning anyone who encouraged me to maintain my independence. I realized with growing horror that this ultimatum wasn't new. It was just the first time she'd stated it explicitly. For years, she'd been conditioning me to prioritize her approval above everything else, including my own needs and happiness. But here's what Jessica didn't know. 3 days earlier, I'd received an email that would change everything. My company's Seattle office needed a senior project manager for their new tech initiative, six-figure salary, full relocation package, and the chance to work on cutting-edge projects I'd only dreamed about. I'd been considering it, weighing the pros and cons of leaving our comfortable life in Denver. Jessica's ultimatum just tipped the scales decisively. The next morning, I went through our usual routine: coffee, breakfast, quick kiss goodbye, while my mind raced with plans. She seemed pleased that I'd canceled my dinner plans, mistaking my retreat for surrender. "See? That wasn't so hard, she said, brushing her hand across my shoulder. "When you consider my feelings, everything works out better for both of us?" I nodded absently, already formulating my exit strategy. At work, I called my friend Mike, my former college roommate who'd been at the dinner I'd missed. "Dude, what happened to you last night? We waited an hour." I explained Jessica's ultimatum, and the silence on the other end was deafening. "Man," Mike finally said, I hate to say this, but some of us have been worried about this for a while. Worried about what? About how she controls you, the way she makes you ask permission for everything, how she always has a reason why you can't hang out with us. His words hit like physical blows because I knew they were true. She's been isolating you for years, he continued. We just didn't know how to say it without sounding like we were attacking your marriage. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years without Jessica's approval. I made a unilateral decision about my future. I called the Seattle office and accepted the position. Fantastic, said the HR director. When can you start? We're hoping for as soon as possible. How's 3 weeks from today? Perfect. I'll send over the relocation package details this afternoon. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely, but I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. I needed to see just how deep Jessica's need for control went. That evening, I casually mentioned that I was thinking about taking a weekend trip to visit my brother in Phoenix, something I hadn't done in 2 years because Jessica always found reasons why it was inconvenient. Her reaction was immediate and revealing. Absolutely not, she said, not even looking up from her tablet. Weekend or our time. That's when we reconnect after busy work weeks. When's the last time we actually did anything together on a weekend? I asked. That's not the point. It's about availability, about prioritizing our marriage. What if I only went for one night? No? What if you came with me? I don't like Phoenix, and your brother's girlfriend is annoying. Every suggestion was met with a flat refusal. It wasn't about compromise or finding solutions. It was about establishing that she had veto power over my decisions. So basically, I can't visit my family without your permission. You can visit them when it doesn't interfere with our relationship. And you decide what interferes? Someone has to. You clearly can't be trusted to consider how your choices affect me. That night, I began documenting our conversations. Not for legal purposes, but as a reality check for myself. I wanted proof of the patterns I was finally seeing clearly. Over the next 2 weeks, I conducted what I privately called my control inventory. I started paying attention to every interaction, every decision, every seemingly casual comment that was actually a directive. The results were staggering. Jessica had opinions about what I wore to work. That shirt makes you look unprofessional. What I ate for lunch. You need to watch your cholesterol. What TV shows I watched. Why do you waste time on that garbage? What books I read. Self-help books are for people who can't figure things out themselves. And even what route I took to drive to work. The highway is more efficient. She monitored my phone usage, questioned unexpected calls, and had somehow convinced me that her oversight was caring rather than controlling. Most disturbingly, she trained me to seek her approval for decisions that should have been entirely mine. I found myself checking with her before buying coffee on my way to work, before staying 10 minutes late to finish a project, before calling my parents. I was a grown man who'd somehow become a child asking for permission. The breaking point came when she discovered I'd been researching weekend photography workshops, a hobby I'd abandoned years earlier because she claimed it took too much time away from us. What's this about? She demanded, showing me my browser history on our shared computer. I was just curious about getting back into photography. When would you even do this? Weekends or family time? Evenings you're too tired from work to be dragging expensive equipment around. Maybe I could take a day off here and there. Using vacation time for a hobby instead of trips together? That's selfish. Every argument circled back to the same theme. My interests, my relationships, my personal growth were selfish unless they directly benefited her or our relationship as she defined it. You know what? She continued. I think this is really about your midlife crisis. You're looking for excitement because you're bored with our stable life. The casual psychology, the dismissal of my interests as pathology, the implication that wanting personal fulfillment was somehow a character flaw, it was all part of the same pattern. That evening, I made my second life-changing phone call. Seattle relocations? I need to schedule movers for 3 weeks from today. I spent the next few days making arrangements with surgical precision. I opened a new bank account and had my direct deposit switched to it. I secured an apartment in Seattle sight unseen, trusting the photos and video tour. I quietly removed my personal items from our joint safe deposit box. I wasn't sneaking around. I was protecting my ability to leave cleanly. The revelation came on a Friday night when Jessica discovered my new bank account. "What is this?" she demanded, waving a statement that had arrived in the mail. "A personal checking account." "Why would you need a personal account? We share everything." "Actually, we don't. You have a personal account that I've never had access to." Her face flushed. "That's different. That's my safety net. This is mine." Safety net from what? From me. From anyone who might try to control my financial decisions. The mask slipped completely then. Control your decisions? I'm your wife. I'm supposed to have input on major choices that affect our family. Opening a checking account affects our family? Everything you do affects our family. That's what marriage means. No, I said quietly. That's what ownership means. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I can't believe you're comparing me to some kind of dictator. I love you. Everything I do is because I love you and want what's best for us. Then why does what's best for us always align perfectly with what's most convenient for you? She couldn't answer that question, and her silence was more revealing than any words could have been. That weekend, Jessica deployed her nuclear option. She planned an elaborate romantic evening. Candles, expensive lingerie, my favorite dinner, the works. "I've been thinking," she said, refilling my wine glass. "Maybe I have been too rigid about some things. We should find a better balance." I recognized the strategy immediately. The carrot after the stick had failed. "I appreciate the effort," I said carefully, "but I think we need to address the underlying issues before jumping back into physical intimacy." Her seductive smile faltered. "What issues?" "I'm trying to move past this rough patch." Moving past something requires acknowledging it first. We haven't talked about why you felt it was appropriate to use our intimate life as a control mechanism. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. "Control mechanism?" She laughed harshly. "I set one boundary about consulting me on social plans, and suddenly I'm some kind of manipulator?" "It wasn't one boundary, Jessica. It's been 6 years of gradually tightening restrictions on my independence." "Independence?" Her voice rose. "You're married. You gave up absolute independence when you said, 'I do.'" "Anand, I gave up being single. I didn't give up being myself." And what followed was the most honest conversation we'd ever had, though honesty might not be the right word for what Jessica contributed. She accused me of being selfish, immature, and unable to handle the responsibilities of marriage. She claimed that her guidance had made me more successful, more socially acceptable, more worthy of respect. "Before me, you were directionless," she said. "I shaped you into someone better. I've invested 6 years in this relationship, in improving you." Those words, "us improving you," crystallized everything I'd been struggling to understand. She hadn't married a partner, she'd acquired a project. "Thank you for being so honest," I said. "That clarifies everything." Monday morning, I submitted my resignation at work, citing the opportunity in Seattle. My boss was disappointed but understanding. "It's a great opportunity," he said. "When's your last day?" "2 weeks from today." That evening, I told Jessica about the job offer and my decision to accept it. Her reaction was everything I'd expected and worse. "Seattle?" she screamed. "You accepted a job in Seattle without even telling me about the offer?" "I'm telling you now." "No, you're informing me of a decision you've already made. There's a difference." "Yes, there is. Just like there's a difference between discussing plans and asking for permission." "This is insane. You can't just decide to move across the country without considering how it affects your wife." "I did consider it. I considered how much happier I'd be working at a job I love in a city where I can rebuild my independence." "What about my job, my friends, my life here?" "What about mine?" "Yours." She looked genuinely confused. "This is your life. This house, this marriage, this stability. I created this for us. You created this for you. I just happened to live here." The argument escalated until she deployed her final weapon, an ultimatum. If you take that job, I won't come with you. Our marriage will be over. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I understand. That's your choice to make. My acceptance of her threat clearly wasn't the response she'd expected. For 6 years, the possibility of losing her had been my greatest fear. Now it felt like a liberation. You're choosing a job over your marriage? She demanded. I'm choosing myself over someone who sees me as a possession to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. She spent the next hour cycling through every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. Tears, accusations, promises to change, threats of revenge, appeals to our history together, claims that I was having a breakdown. I listened to it all with the detachment of someone watching a performance. The spell was broken. The words that would have sent me into panic mode just weeks earlier now sounded like exactly what they were. Desperate attempts to maintain control. 2 weeks later, I loaded my belongings into a moving truck while Jessica stood in our driveway, making one final plea. Please, she begged, tears streaming down her face, don't throw away everything we've built. I can change. I can be better. For a moment, I felt the old familiar tug of responsibility and guilt. Then I remembered her casual cruelty when she'd felt secure in her control, and I knew this was just another performance. I hope you do change, I said sincerely, but not for me, for yourself. The drive to Seattle took 2 days. 2 days of podcasts, audiobooks, and long stretches of silence where I processed 6 years of gradual psychological conditioning. I thought about the friends I'd lost contact with because Jessica found them immature. The family gatherings I'd missed because she deemed them drama-filled. The career opportunities I'd passed up because she preferred stability. The hobbies I'd abandoned because she needed more quality time. By the time I reached the Washington state line, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. My new apartment was small but had a view of Puget Sound that took my breath away. More importantly, it was mine. Every decision about how to arrange it, what to put on the walls, what music to play, all mine. The first few weeks in Seattle were a revelation. I had forgotten what it felt like to make spontaneous plans without calculating the emotional cost. To try new restaurants because they sounded interesting rather than because they met someone else's criteria. To stay late at work on an engaging project without needing to justify my passion to someone who saw it as a betrayal. I joined a photography group and discovered that my rusty skills came back quickly. I made friends with colleagues who knew me only as I was now, confident, engaged, enthusiastic about my work and life. 3 months in, I received a package from Jessica. Inside was a letter and my grandfather's watch, which I'd forgotten to pack. The letter was revealing in ways she probably didn't intend. I still don't understand why you threw away everything we built together, it began. We had the perfect life, and you destroyed it because you couldn't appreciate what I was trying to create for us. Maybe someday you'll realize what you lost and want to come back. I might even forgive you when that happens. Even in what was ostensibly an apology letter, she couldn't acknowledge that her perfect life had required my submission. Her offer to forgive me for leaving was perhaps the most telling line of all. I folded the letter carefully and threw it away. Some conversations aren't worth having, even with yourself. 6 months after leaving Denver, I was promoted to senior project manager. My boss cited my innovation, leadership, and positive team dynamics as key factors. You seem like a different person than during your interview, she said. More confident, more decisive. I feel like a different person, I admitted, like I'm finally comfortable in my own skin. A year later, I met Sarah at a coffee shop in Pike Place Market. She was a marine biologist, funny and brilliant, with an easy laugh and zero interest in managing my choices. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, ranging from travel stories to career ambitions to terrible movies we secretly loved. And when she mentioned a hiking trip she was planning for the weekend, I felt the old familiar anxiety, the automatic calculation of whether this would conflict with someone else's expectations. Then I remembered, those expectations no longer existed. I was free to be interested, to make plans, to say yes to adventure without seeking permission. That sounds amazing, and I said, I'd love to hear about it when you get back. Want to come along? I can always use a hiking partner who won't mind if I stop every 10 minutes to identify plants. The invitation was casual, no pressure, just an offer to share an experience. It felt revolutionary after years of every social interaction being a negotiation. I'd love to, I said, and meant it completely. As our relationship developed over the following months, I kept waiting for the control mechanisms to emerge. Surely Sarah would eventually reveal expectations about my behavior, demands for priority over my other interests, requirements for consultation on my decisions. Instead, she encouraged me to maintain my photography hobby, even suggesting locations for weekend shoots. She was genuinely interested in my work, asking thoughtful questions about projects without trying to influence my career choices. When I mentioned wanting to visit my brother in Phoenix, she helped me find good flight deals and asked me to bring back photos. Don't you want to know exactly when I'll be back? I asked, still adjusting to this level of trust. You'll be back when you're back, she said with a shrug. I trust you to communicate if plans change dramatically. Trust. Such a simple concept, but one that had been absent from my marriage. Jessica's version of love had been built on surveillance and control. Sarah's was built on respect and freedom. One evening, as we cooked dinner together in my apartment, Sarah asked about my ex-wife. I'd mentioned the divorce, but hadn't gone into details. What happened, if you don't mind me asking? You don't have to talk about it if it's too personal. I found myself telling her the whole story, the gradual isolation, the ultimatum about intimacy, the job opportunity that became my escape route. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but never offering unsolicited advice or opinions about what I should have done differently. That sounds exhausting, she said when I finished, always having to calculate the emotional cost of your choices. It was. I didn't realize how exhausting until I stopped doing it. Do you ever regret leaving? I considered the question seriously. I regret that the marriage wasn't what I thought it was. I regret not recognizing the patterns earlier. But leaving? Never. Not for a second. She nodded thoughtfully. It takes courage to walk away from something that looks perfect from the outside. It takes more courage to stay in something that's slowly destroying you from the inside. 2 years after leaving Denver, I received an unexpected email from Jessica. She'd found my work address online and sent a professional-looking message with the subject line, "Checking in." I heard through mutual friends that you're doing well in Seattle, she wrote. I wanted you to know that I've been working on myself since you left. I'm in therapy now trying to understand my own patterns in relationships. I don't expect you to respond, but I wanted to apologize for the ways I tried to control you. You were right to leave. I hope you're happy. It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged her behavior without simultaneously justifying it or making herself the victim. The message seemed genuine, without manipulation or hidden agenda. I stared at the email for a long time, feeling nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no desire for reconciliation or revenge. Just a mild hope that she was telling the truth about working on herself, for her own sake and that of anyone who might love her in the future. I didn't respond. Some chapters of your life are meant to stay closed, even when they end on a better note than expected. 3 years after my escape from Denver, Sarah and I moved in together. The decision was mutual, practical, and exciting. Everything major relationship milestones should be, but rarely are, when one person holds all the power. We found a house with a yard for her garden and a basement I could convert into a darkroom for my photography. The mortgage application asked for our relationship status, and I hesitated over the word partners. Is that accurate? I asked Sarah, showing her the form. I'd say so, she replied. We're building something together, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams together. That's partnership, right? Partnership. Not ownership, not management, not a project to be perfected. Just two people choosing to walk through life together while remaining themselves. On our housewarming night, we sat on our back porch watching the sunset over the Olympic Mountains. Sarah was reading a book about marine ecosystems. I was editing photos from our recent camping trip. This is nice, she said, looking up from her book. Just, Tim? This. Being together without needing to be entertained or managed or anything else. It's the nicest thing I've ever experienced, I admitted. Even nicer than your old life? The stability, the routine, all that? I thought about Jessica's letter, about her belief that we'd had the perfect life, about her inability to understand why I'd walked away from what looked like everything a person could want. That wasn't my life, I said finally. That was someone else's life that I was allowed to live in, as long as I followed the rules and didn't ask too many questions about who made them. And this? I looked around at our imperfect house with its creaky floors and drafty windows, at Sarah with her hair in a messy bun and soil under her fingernails from planting tomatoes, at the life we were building together without scripts or ultimatums or power struggles. This is mine, ours, real. 4 years after Jessica's ultimatum about intimacy being off the table until I obeyed her, I proposed to Sarah during a hiking trip in the Cascades, not because it was expected or demanded, but because I wanted to promise her the same freedom and respect she'd always given me. Her yes was enthusiastic and immediate. No conditions, no negotiations, no attempts to use the moment to extract commitments about future behavior. Just joy at the prospect of building something beautiful together. As we planned our wedding, a small ceremony focused on celebration rather than display, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The man who had once needed permission to have dinner with friends was now planning a marriage based on mutual independence and support. The ceremony was everything Jessica and I hadn't been able to achieve: authentic, joyful, and free of performance anxiety. My vows focused on promising to love Sarah as she was, rather than trying to shape her into someone else. Hers promised the same. During the reception, my brother pulled me aside. "I have to tell you something," he said. "I was worried about you for years when you were married to Jessica. You seemed like you were shrinking, becoming less yourself every time I saw you. Why didn't you say anything? Would you have listened? You seemed determined to make that marriage work, no matter what it cost you." He was right. I wouldn't have listened. Couldn't have heard criticism of Jessica when I was still convinced that love meant accepting someone's control over your life. "I'm just glad you found your way out," he continued, "and found someone who lets you be yourself." That night, Sarah and I sat in our hotel room, still wearing our wedding clothes, exhausted but happy. "So," she said, curled up against my shoulder, "how does it feel to be married again?" "Completely different," I answered honestly. "Like the word means something entirely different now. Good different, the best different." 5 years after Jessica's ultimatum freed me from a cage I'd mistaken for a home, I got a promotion to regional director, requiring me to travel frequently between Seattle and our new San Francisco office. The old me would have been paralyzed by the thought of making such a major career decision without extensive consultation and approval. Instead, I discussed the opportunity with Sarah over dinner, explaining the benefits and challenges, asking for her thoughts and concerns. "It's an amazing opportunity," she said, "and you'd be great at it. The travel schedule sounds intense, though." "Too intense? I can negotiate some of the requirements if you think it would be too disruptive." She looked at me with that expression I'd learned to recognize: fond exasperation at my occasional relapses into seeking permission rather than sharing information. "It's not my decision to make," she said gently. "It's your career, your choice. I support whatever you decide, and we'll figure out how to make it work. What if I'm gone too much? What if you get lonely? Then we'll adjust. Marriage is about adapting to life changes together, not avoiding anything that might be inconvenient." I took the promotion. The travel was challenging but manageable, and Sarah used my absence to pursue her own passion project, starting a nonprofit focused on marine conservation. When I expressed concern that I was being selfish by prioritizing my career advancement, she laughed. "This is what partnership looks like," she said. "We both get to grow and pursue our dreams. We don't have to shrink ourselves to fit into someone else's vision of the perfect relationship." Sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep, I wondered what would have happened if I'd stayed in Denver. Would I have eventually worn Jessica down, convinced her to loosen her grip? Would she have eventually worn me down completely, erasing the last traces of my independent identity? I thought about the man I'd been: anxious, diminished, constantly calculating how to avoid conflict while slowly losing himself. That version of me felt like a stranger now, someone I knew well but could barely recognize. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken months of small choices, tiny acts of self-assertion, gradual recognition that my thoughts and preferences mattered. It had taken learning to trust my own judgment again, to believe that my happiness was worth fighting for. Most importantly, it had taken meeting someone who loved me, not despite my independence, but because of it. 6 years after leaving Denver, I received news that Jessica had remarried. A mutual friend mentioned it casually, probably expecting some reaction. Jealousy, regret, curiosity about whether she'd changed. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Genuine happiness for her. If she'd truly been working on herself, if she'd learned to love someone without needing to control them, then maybe her story had a redemptive arc too. Good for her, I told Sarah when I shared the news. I hope she's learned how to be a partner instead of a manager. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if she'd been different? If she'd been able to love you the way you needed to be loved? I considered the question seriously. It was something I'd wondered about during the hardest parts of our divorce, when grief over lost dreams competed with relief at my escape. Sometimes, I admitted, but then I realized that if she'd been different, I might never have been pushed to find my own strength. I might never have learned what healthy love actually looks like. Silver linings in manipulation and control? More like, sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads directly to the best thing. Her ultimatum about intimacy being off the table until I obeyed her was the wake-up call I needed to realize I'd been sleeping through my own life. 7 years after Jessica told me that intimacy was off the table until I started obeying her, Sarah and I celebrated our third wedding anniversary with a trip to Norway, a destination I'd always dreamed of visiting but had never mentioned during my first marriage because Jessica considered international travel unnecessarily expensive and stressful. As we stood together watching the northern lights dance across the Arctic sky, I thought about how that moment would have been impossible in my old life. Not just because Jessica wouldn't have wanted to go, but because the man I'd been then wouldn't have believed he deserved such beauty, such freedom, such joy. Thank you, I said to Sarah, my breath visible in the cold air. For what? For loving me enough to let me be myself. She turned to me with a smile that was part affection, part exasperation. You still don't quite get it, do you? I don't let you be yourself. You just are yourself, and I love who that is. Standing there in the Arctic Circle with a woman who had never once tried to diminish me, I finally understood the difference. Jessica's ultimatum about intimacy had been designed to break my will and force my submission. Instead, it had broken my illusions and forced my awakening. The table she thought she controlled hadn't just been flipped, it had been completely replaced with something built on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and the revolutionary idea that love multiplies rather than divides when both people are free to be themselves. Sometimes the cruelest thing someone can do to you is also the kindest. Jessica's attempt to control me through intimacy had set me free to discover what real intimacy could be. Not a reward for good behavior, but a natural expression of two people who chose each other every day without coercion or manipulation. As Sarah and I made our way back to our hotel, hands intertwined and hearts full, I silently thanked my ex-wife for the ultimatum that had saved my life by ending the relationship that was slowly killing my spirit. The best revenge against someone who tries to control you isn't anger or retaliation. It's building a life so authentic and fulfilling that you can look back with gratitude for their rejection, knowing it freed you to find what you actually deserved. Our story has come to an end. If you've made it this far, how about subscribing to our channel? It helps us immensely. I've selected 2 other videos for you that I'm sure you'll enjoy. Feel free to click on them. I'll be waiting for you in the next story. See you soon.